Hey, thanks for clicking on the video. Today we're showcasing an all-time hunter build. Now, I'm not going to say this is a build you haven't seen before, but I'll tell you this is the best version of our beloved punch hunter. A quick YouTube search shows us Mactix put out a build boasting a 7,522% increase in damage, but what we've got today gets all the way up to 9,586% increased damage. This brings us from a measly 8,685 damage from a punch to 832,554. And this actually isn't even the ceiling, as you can slap on tractor cannon or some source of weaken to easily hit max damage, and you get those beautiful 999s. Also, no, you don't need a specific class item roll, but we'll get into that and more in just a second with timestamps down below if you're just looking for a certain portion of the build. I've also got dim links down there too, and then if you enjoy this build, a like and a subscription would be much appreciated. But getting straight into it, when it comes to Punch Hunter, the crux of the build is, well, on our punch, and then everything else exists to boost that as much as possible. The sources where we get our stacking damage increases will come from our Prismatic subclass, our exotic armor piece, our artifact, and even tonics. Each one works in tandem to perfectly complement the next multiplicative source. So, starting with our exotic armor, and where there's actually some variability with this build, we want Liar's Handshake, or a Spirit of the Liar class item. Both of these exotics have the exact same functionality, giving us access to the counter punch. Now, I do want to emphasize that you can use either or. If you're a newer player with no good class items, or you just hate how relativism looks, you can use standard Liar's Handshake and achieve the exact same results that the rest of this video is going to showcase. But at the same time, a relativism roll is going to be the best option. Not only do you get access to the counter punch, but you can further enhance the build in whichever way you wish, but we'll look at those other exotic perks later in the video, as right now we're solely concerned with Liars. So taking another quick look at our exotics description, dealing damage with a powered melee or being hit by a melee attack will allow you to follow up with an extremely powerful arc melee counterpunch. It's a simple mechanic that gives us the cross counter buff whenever we receive melee damage or deal powered melee damage. Then any melee, while that buff is active, gives us the unique Liar's Melee, which is effectively just a plus 200% damage buff. And while we're here looking at this, I actually want to start us on a journey of how this melee, dealing 8,685 damage, reaches those numbers I showed you just a second ago. So here with our exotic armor piece, we get a 200% damage increase, bringing it to 26,055 damage. This is a pretty good start, but let's now dive into our subclass to take it even further. First things first is our abilities. Your super can be anything you want. I'm either running Golden Gun or Silk Strike depending on the activity. Silk Strike though is a fantastic choice, especially when looking at how fast roaming supers come back now. But then for the other ability that doesn't really matter too much, your grenade can be anything as well. Grapple is great for mobility, and Magnetic Grenade can be a source of weaken, but I'll talk about that in a second, although your grenade genuinely doesn't really matter. But then for our actually important abilities, our class ability will 100% need to be Gambler's Dodge, so that we refill our melee when dodging your enemies. And then that melee is the iconic combination blow, which refills our dodge when scoring a kill with this ability, heals us when scoring a kill with this ability, and then also gives itself a stacking damage buff on kills that caps at ×3 for 309% increased damage. So if we take this ability and add it to our Liar's Melee, we get 87,936 damage, which at this point in the build, we're already looking at a 1,012% increase over our base melee. But I'll have you know, it's gonna ramp up fast. So back to our subclass, the next important pieces are our aspects. In this case, we're running Winter's Shroud and Stylus Executioner. Winter's Shroud exists as our way to slow and then eventually freeze enemies. Not to mention, you also get some bonuses like increased dodge cooldown while slowing enemies. But as for how this fits into the build, it all comes down to two things. One is that slow and freeze are darkness debuffs, which will be very important for the rest of the build. And two is that frozen enemies take increased melee damage, 120% to be exact. Which, if we come back again to our growing list of stacking damage, we're now at 203,132 damage in a single melee, or a 2,338% increase over base. But before settling there, we'll then look at Stylish Executioner. This aspect does a ton. When killing any debuffed enemy, which slowed enemies from Winter's Shroud will be the most abundant source, you go invis and also get some true sight. And then it says, After performing a stylus execution, your next melee attack while invisible weakens targets. Now we can see that at work here, but that's not actually why we want this. What we want is the hidden functionality where the melee that's supposed to weaken enemies actually receives a 200% damage increase. So adding that to the stack using everything up till now and the new 200% increase, our melee deals 609,394 damage for a massive 7,016% increase over our base melee. And this isn't even difficult to pull off since we're trying to freeze enemies, which counts as a debuff for Stylus Executioner to make us invisible. But keeping things moving and going back into our subclass, we're now going to go down to our Fragments, where we have yet another source of damage stacking. This one comes from Fast of Courage that gives our light abilities, which is Combination Blow, a 10% increase in damage against dark debuffed enemies, which means frozen or slowed enemies. So nothing changes execution-wise, but we're now dealing 670,334 damage for a total of 7,718% increase over our base melee. And now before moving to our next source of stacking, we're going to return to the rest of our fragments to fill out the build and actually give us more depth than just melee doing more damage. Faceted Protection gives us some very nice DR while near enemies, which is all the time with this build. Faceted Blessing jumpstarts health regen, which is great on top of the instant health granted from Combination Blow. Faceted Purpose gives us some super dependent survivability. If you're running either of my suggestions between Goldie and Silkstrike, that'll be Restoration and Woven Mail. And then for our last fragment, we have Faceted Ruin for stronger shatters and ignitions. This fragment just helps with ad clear. But now with our subclass filled out, normally I'd take us into weapon recommendations or armor mods, but we're not gonna do that just yet, as we actually need to take a pit stop at our artifact to finish off increasing our melee damage. To do that here, it's accomplished by two perks. The first is Conductive Cosmic Crystal, which causes our Arc and Void abilities to deal increased damage to stasis debuffed enemies. It's essentially a second Fast of Courage. The percentage increase here is 5% at base or 8% while boosted. For the purpose of saving time and not being flashy about a 3% increase, we'll skip to the boosted amount, which when factored in, looking at our melee, it allows it to deal 723,960 damage for an 8,335 increase over our base melee. But then back into the artifact, the next perk is Arc Compounding, new with Act 2, which gives any arc damage a 15% damage buff against blinded targets. Now, before showing what this increases our damage to, the easiest way to activate this perk is with another artifact perk being Retinal Burn, where all you need to do is score 2 precision hits with any arc weapon to blind the target for 10 seconds. So to pull this off, at some point during your melee and freeze combo, you just need to spit out 2 precision hits with whatever arc weapon you have on hand. But once you've done that, Arc Compounding activates and brings our melee damage to 832,554 for a total increase of 9,586% over our base melee, which started at just 8,000 damage. And that is actually where the stacking ends, with the full combo being a Liar's Handshake melee, Combination Blow ×3, Freeze, Invis, Facet of Courage, Boosted Conductive Cosmic Crystal, and Arc Compounding. And then, like I showed way in the beginning, you can apply Void Weaken or a 30% debuff with the likes of Tractor Cannon to reach the max damage possible. But since this is a build video, I actually want this build to be good to use. And in my opinion, trying to add in that extra source of weaken felt pretty restrictive, so I erred against it. And with that said, we don't want to neglect the rest of the build. So let's quickly look at weapons, armor mods, and the rest of the artifact. Where weapons are concerned, you can honestly use whatever you want as long as you have some source of arc precision damage. My build looks like Tenacious Mastery, The Call, or Lost Signal, with Pyroelectric Propellant or Noxious Vetiver as my arc damage, both with jolting feedback, which that jolt also feeds into Stylus Executioner, and then some activity dependent heavy, most likely being Chill Inhibitor if I don't want to think. But like I said, weapons can really be whatever you want. Then moving over to our armor, to outfit that, stat-wise, we don't really need strength or mobility, so I'd put preference towards resilience and discipline, with mobility and recovery being a secondary focus. Then for our mods, on the helmet, 2 to 3 hands-on, with a finder taking spot 3 if you're not going all in on super regen. For our arms, triple heavy-handed gives us an orb on every melee kill. The chest piece should have resistances and reserves, you know, the usual stuff. Legs are a good spot for 1 recuperation for even more health regen, and then 2 innervations so we can use our grenade more often, whichever that may be. And then our class item is the classic combo of Powerful Attraction and Special Finisher with a spot for either Distribution or Proximity Ward. And then from there, we're going to dip back into the artifact with anything else besides what was already mentioned. Authorized Mods Melee allows us to run more stat mods on our armor. Concussive Reload is great for debuffing bosses and such to really hit the damage cap on our melee, and pairs wonderfully with Lost Signal. You can then also run Trace Evidence if you wanted to spawn some Ionic Traces when using Retinal Burn. Also, not to mention at this point, Retinal Burn does stun unstoppable champions, so with Pyroelectric Propellant or Noxious Vetiver, you can do Jolting Feedback, which does overloads, and then also Blind Unstoppables. Although that isn't super necessary, since the Shatter from your Winter's Shroud freezes are going to stun Unstops too. But then the final note that I want to make is what to run alongside Spirit of the Liar if you are indeed using Relativism. For me, I'm either running Galenor or Caliban. Caliban can actually mess up your stacking by shattering enemies early or not allowing you to get combination blow to ×3, but the trade-off is that you have blatantly nuts ad clear on top of great single target damage. And then Galenor, which is what you've been seeing in the B-roll, essentially halves our super's cooldown, and since I was running Silkstrike, I had it up very often. But to be honest, there's nothing necessary to have this build work. Just run whatever you got. Which then takes us to the gameplay loop. This is as simple as a gameplay loop gets, and I'm sure you figured it out by watching the B-roll. You start all engagements by dodging near some enemies to slow them. Then use combination blow on one of the debuffed enemies to go invis, recharge your dodge, and prep a counterpunch. From there, dodge again to freeze anything nearby with the second application of slow on your dodge, and then use that counterpunch with all the stacked buffs to nuke whatever is unlucky enough to be in front of you. And if it's an especially beefy target or a dangerous target, use your arc weapon to blind them in order to get arc compounding to activate for even more damage. Rinse and repeat this, popping super whenever you have it, and I assure you, this build with the insane amount of stacking and especially insane super regen if you're running Galenor will carry you through pretty much any activity. And I think that's everything. A bit of a longer video, and I hope you enjoyed. Let me know what you think of this build down below, and I really would like to say thank you so much for getting this far into the video. Your viewership means a ton to me. It helps me out more than you could possibly know. If you want to support me, support the channel, a like, a comment, a subscription goes a very long way on the road to 11,000 subscribers, and I would be more than happy to have you as part of the community. If you want to support me and support the channel, but you can't think of a comment down below, elevated punch. And with that, as usual, I hope you are having a great day, and I hope to see you around.